Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos and I've been wondering if we'll ever get the chance of seeing Britain's foremost male dancer in musical theatre, that's the amazing Charlie Stemp, appearing in a one-man show in that wonderful Art Deco theatre, which you can find just off the Strand here in London. That show might be called Stemping at the Savoy. Well, from the ridiculous to the sublime. And I'm actually going to start today with a question, and it's quite a big question. What is musical theatre? And that is a big question, and a lot of people have tried to answer that over the years. Sometimes the best way of answering that is with another question. What isn't musical theatre? And certainly I've met people in my travels over the years who argue that musical theatre is in fact very narrow, that it is a defined thing, defined in a narrow way, to encompass musical theatre and what we would recognise as the Broadway American musical, and not much else. These people rule out things like Gilbert and Sullivan because they identify that as a strictly defined something else, in this case, comic opera. Now, of course, you can look at the world that way. But actually here on Musical Talk, we've had our own definition for a very long time. Here at Musical Talk, we have long considered that we would accept something as a piece of musical theatre in the broadest sense if it falls into the category of musical theatre, musical film, cabaret or pantomime. Now, I appreciate that we're defining musical theatre with the term musical theatre in that list. So what do we mean by that? Well, I think here at Musical Talk, musical theatre is almost any production, be it film or stage, where there is some element of a song, or at least music and words. But then again, what makes up a song? Does a song have to have music and words? Well, usually yes. But actually, we've all heard over the years instrumental versions of a song, i.e. just the orchestra or the band playing without any lyrics, and we wouldn't consider that to be any less a song. So does a song have to be music and lyrics at the same time? Theoretically, it could be that it has had music and lyrics at some stage, but one or the other has been divested. We can go on like this forever, and I'm not proposing to spend this episode discussing that, but it's a very useful start, because the show we're going to be discussing today pushes at the envelope of what musical theatre is. And I'll explain why. The show is a show that I saw at last year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and I know it's been performed elsewhere, particularly in America, and it's called The Wreck of the Queen Thomasina. Now, here's the interesting thing. It isn't really a musical. Except, of course, it is. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it here today on Musical Talk. But it certainly is outside of the normal definitions of musical theatre, certainly the narrow ones, but it's really on the edges of the broader ones, which I was trying, probably very unsuccessfully, to delineate just a few minutes ago. Now, at one strict level, this is a show that has only one song in it. It has a kind of folk shanty lullaby at the end. And the placing of that single song at the end is incredibly important for the emotional impact of the narrative. Absolutely fine. So at a very strict level, it falls into the world of musical theatre as Musical Talk defines it, because it is a show with at least one song in it. But here's the interesting thing. It's clear that people are more willing to accept musical theatre if it has music in it rather than lyrics. What I'm saying, I think, is that sometimes we are prepared to accept a song that isn't really a song, i.e. it doesn't have music and lyrics at the same time. So you can push more readily in the direction of having a musical, which is a play with music but no lyrics. It's much harder to go in the other direction, but that's what The Wreck of the Queen Thomasina has done. It is like a lyrical musical without the music. Now, it does have this song at the end, as I say, so it does fall into our categories if you want to get snippy about it. But what drew me and Colin Malloy, because he and I went to see this together at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, was the moment it ended, we had this strange sense of having seen a musical, even though it wasn't advertised as such. And the reason is, it's a two-hander, performed marvellously by the writer Connor Johnson and Harrison Lind, but it's in verse form. But not strict verse, as in dumpty-dumpty-dumpty-dum rhythms. That would get very tiring very quickly. It's much more mellifluous and serpentine than that, but you're certainly taken on a lyrical journey through a narrative piece which concludes with a song. And that is the structure of the wreck of the Queen Thomasina. And both Colm and I, at the end of the show, as I say, looked at each other and said, that is worthy of a discussion here on Musical Talk on two fronts. It's a great show, which of course is always our first consideration. But secondly, it does somehow feel like musical theatre without music. It's like you're listening to a lyrical piece. And the reason it's like that is because it is. It is a lyrical piece of theatre, and I would argue musical theatre. It just doesn't have music. Until, of course, the last song. Well, that's quite enough for me trying to explain why the wreck of the Queen Thomasina is being discussed here today, in this episode of Musical Talk, except for me to say that I do think the world is better for us taking a broader and wider interpretation of what musical theatre actually is. So what is the wreck of the Queen Thomasina about? Well, here's a description provided by Connor Johnson. An existential tragicomedy about two pirates, Crumb and Nickel, who wake on a deserted island, sans captain, sans crew, lots of sand. Written in rhyming verse, dealing in themes of human treasure chest sexuality, spoon and flask fisticuffs, and palliative pirate drag. Come for the swashbuckling, stay for the delicate deconstruction of masculinity. Which I must say I think is also one of my favourite blurbs from any piece of musical theatre I've seen. So, now we know what we're talking about, in both senses, contextually and narratively, let's get down to the bread and butter of today. We're about to hear a wonderful conversation that I had, along with my friend and fellow presenter Colm Malloy, at last year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, with Connor Johnson, Harrison Lind and Jessica Graham, about the wonderful 5-star show, The Wreck of the Queen Thomasina. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Hi, I'm Connor Johnson. I'm the writer of The Wreck of the Queen Thomasina, and I also play Nickel in the play.
Hi, my name is Harrison Lind. I'm an actor. I play Crumb. And I also did the sound design and some of the music design for the show as well.
And I'm Jessica Graham, and I am associate directing / doing whatever tech and or flyering or various production elements they need.
All the important stuff.
Basically everything.
Yeah. And our theatre company is Footpath Theatre Company.
Now, let's talk about the name of the show, which is...
The Wreck of the Queen Thomasina.
Now, that immediately conjures up the sea, possibly pirates, possibly... It certainly sounds historic. I know, we've seen the show, so we know what we're talking about here, but would you care to explain briefly what the show is? Then we'll take it from there, as they say.
It's a play about two pirates who wake up stranded on a desert island, and they find a chest. The contents of the chest are a surprise, though. We're going to make audience members come see the show to find that out.
Oh, yes. No spoilers. Yes.
But it's written in rhyming verse, and the verse ranges from, old words to modern script and back again.
But that gives it a very contemporary feel, actually. It's quite interesting because, forgive me, if you went up to someone these days and you said, hey, come and see my rhyming show. Yeah. What did Shakespeare write in Iambic Pentameter? Yeah. People go, no. It's very kind of you to ask. Goodbye. And it's very easy to fall into the trap of sentence ending in A sound, sentence ending in A sound, and sentence ending in B. Really dumb couplets. Yeah. This doesn't do that at all. The rhymes are there for you to pick out if you're playing that game. You could listen to this entirely without really getting the idea that it's in verse. It's so sort of natural. The scansion is perfect in terms of conversationalness for me. And yet these words pop out sometimes as a hanging rhyme, which I've always admired, where the one syllable of thing, and then as the first syllable of the next sentence, in fact, makes a double syllable rhyme later on. These are really, I think, beautiful ways of expressing something, and an enormous challenge for a writer. So the first question has got to be, why was this the approach that you wanted for this show? And we'll be talking about the expertise of then performing it in just a minute.
So this stretches back to the origin of the show.
Yes.
Which actually was written for a festival of plays in Brooklyn, and they were all going to be set on a desert island set piece. So they filled the stage with sand, and they were looking for submissions, and I was stranded with COVID, so I had nothing to do but write. And I had actually just seen, I have to give a shout out to a production of Cyrano with James McAvoy as Cyrano, and it was a modern adaptation written by the playwright Martin Crimp. And it was, as the original was as well, written in rhyming couplets. But it was like one of the most modern plays I have ever seen. And
it resonated in a very real way.
Really resonated. Yeah. It's probably top 3 theater performances I've ever seen.
Gosh, right.
And so that was stuck in my head. And I was home with COVID. And after that, seeing that play, was like, I want to try my hand at this.
I can do that, as they say in the chorus line.
It was more of a, could I do that?
Very good. Yeah, your humility is excellent.
And, it was funny at first. It was like snail paced. I was just grinding, trying to figure out rhymes. But I found out that as the days went on, I would wake up dreaming in rhyming couplets, and I would wake up with new things to add, and I would get on my computer, and then I just got in this rhythm, and I would just constantly be thinking. I was actually kind of scared, because it was like, will this wear off after I finish writing this play?
Well, are you still dreaming in couplets? I think would be a very interesting question.
I think I've stopped dreaming in couplets, but I have a feeling if I tried to write another play that rhymed, it would return.
It's your latent superpower.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's really interesting. I would like to unpack that just a little bit further, if I may, though. So, the Cyrano version that you saw, now what was it for you that made it so particular? Now, obviously you were impressed by the craftsmanship of the writing that you saw, but why was it so resonant? Because I'd like to see the target in a way that you were aiming for.
Yeah, I think that, this isn't just the writing. The show in general was incredibly plain. There was almost no set. There were almost no props.
Some sand?
There was.
No, that's your Miami thing, isn't it? Yes,
was,
sorry. It wouldn't be in Serrano. You're quite right.
I mean,
I'm just going to mix some cement during this scene.
And for me, it quickly became apparent, and I mean, they even wrote in graffiti on the wall at one point, "I love words. That is all," or something like that. It became obvious that this show was about the love of language, which is obviously a huge theme in Cyrano.
Yeah, I mean, he's writing love letters for somebody. He's somebody's proxy, isn't he?
Exactly, and the lover can only enjoy this beautiful language. That's the only, that's what gets her going.
So you're right. I mean, that is the avatar to go for in this kind of sense. So
exactly.
So love of language.
Yes, and I think it clarified something for me in my own enjoyment of theater, and why I like theater versus movies.
You're amongst friends.
Exactly. I won't say it too loud though. But is that language is the foremost part of theater for me. It's not a visual medium. It's not a touch-based medium, but it's an auditory medium. And then it is also obviously visual, but I think the auditory part is the most important.
Do you respond to radio in the same way, by the way?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of audiobooks, podcasts, and I love radio plays. And one of my favorite plays of all time is Under Milkwood.
Dylan Thomas, right.
Yeah, so that's maybe the kind of most incredible bar of language-based plays. But
how would you describe that? Tone poem? And was Cyrano doing that?
Yeah, I would say tone poem, and also, like you said, a ballad, where it becomes this kind of epic. And I think also I have a deep appreciation for ancient poetry, like Old Norse poems, like The Wanderer, and I mean, I'm making myself sound way better read than I actually am, but I do love, like...
If you could translate Beowulf for me immediately.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How does it start? It's like, hooah! Like, anyways. So I think, like, I feel often when I watch modern plays that there's a formal element that they're eschewing, understandably, but I actually think it harms for me, like, when I hear plays that are just completely in vernacular, like modern vernacular, I don't necessarily hate, like, it could be a good play, but I always feel like it's a missed opportunity, because you can, and when I saw, this is what it is, when I saw the Cyrano, I was like, oh my god, you can use vernacular in this formalist, like, structure, and it works beautifully.
Can I just add something real quick?
Yeah.
I heard a sentiment shared about musical theater once that has stuck with me, and I enjoy musical theater.
Whoa, careful.
But
it's all right. We'll keep you in the conversation anyway.
Casually, I'm a bit more on the this side of things, but the sentiment that in a musical, the only reason that someone sings is that they lose the words to have an emotion, and so they start to sing.
I've heard the theory. Yes.
Yeah, and so I think that something that's very special about this show is that from start to finish, they're experiencing some of the most important emotions and moments of their lives.
Well, it is existentialist in that sense.
Yeah.
Not wishing to sound too poncy, but it is.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah.
Yeah, and so they're quite in harmony with a tune of the universe. They're these conduits for these greater emotions, and I think that that's quite special.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, I think, like, I wanted the show to have a feeling, like an epic feeling, and not in a sense of, like, this is epic, but like a...
No, as in a traditional historic poem. You know, the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is...
Yes, which was a huge inspiration.
Oh, well, I was going to say, there's a touch of it there, isn't there? If only in the water everywhere. So actually what we're saying is that, this is going to be pretentious, and I'm not expecting you to say, yes, that's exactly it, but what we're getting here, with the Queen Thomasina, we're getting the lyrics of the music of the spheres. Now, that is pretentious, and I'm quite happy to accept that. But it's... you've mentioned musical theatre, and of course our position is musical theatre, and it is the lyricism and the lyrical nature of the words of the piece that we've seen which actually drew us in. And whilst, it's important to say that verse, in whatever its forms, isn't the same thing as lyrics, although, of course, I'm going to mention Gilbert and Sullivan, that's light verse first set to music, and, no one can argue that's not been successful, so there's no wrong way of doing these things. But I'm still fascinated by this idea that you've seen something that it's a form you admire, you've seen a really good example that's inspired you, you've got some time, these are the magic ingredients for creation and inspiration, but then, and you were very good about saying this at the beginning, being able to do it is a very different kettle of fish. How easy was it for you until you got into your trance-like state of couplet writing? I mean, I'm genuinely interested to know how you sat there with your blank piece of paper or blank screen and said, right, and I'm using both spellings of right there.
Yeah. At first, I wasn't even sure that it was going to be rhyming. And I think the first words I wrote were, "Are you awake? Of course I am. I'm talking, fuck's sake."
But that immediately sets a tone, doesn't it? Doesn't
Yes.
it? I mean, first of all, you've got the context of where you are. We've seen it. And by the way, briefly, wonderful stage set. We both love this. The fact that your desert island is represented by two Hessian sacks with the word "sand!" exclamation mark and more sand exclamation mark on the second bit. But actually, that's all you need. You've created an atmosphere, and that's essentially the opening lines you've just given.
Yeah. There's a couple names back and forth now, but the names didn't exist at that point.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and I suppose that does establish character. But you've got that lovely sense of the rhyme is there if you want it. You've got the modern, the swearing makes it immediately contemporary in a way that Coleridge Taylor probably wouldn't have plopped that in.
Unlikely.
But I think. So you did start at the beginning. I mean, I like that fact you were adding. You said earlier you were adding things as you went along, but you start at the beginning, which is a very good place to start, as everyone knows. You've got the tone in that first sentence. Did you labour on that, or did that come quickly? And did that set the tone for the thing?
Yeah.
thereafter?
So that immediately felt right to me, and then I started on the next line, and I was like, what rhymes with sake. And then I spent like 30 minutes trying to come up with and then I was like,
brain ache. There we are.
I might. Okay, maybe I've made a mistake. Maybe I'll just not make it.
You asleep. You do seem to be dreaming.
And I think that was like there were a few moments, real teetering moments, where I was like very close to giving up on the rhyme.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm glad you didn't.
I'm glad I didn't too. And they were all in like the first 5 pages of the show. And eventually I just got so deep into it that I couldn't give up on the rhyme, even though I still
It was your
thought about
desert island, actually.
Yes.
You were stranded there.
Exactly. And I think that like became a theme because I couldn't see anybody. And when I read the first draft, I actually got some friends to do a reading of the first draft before I sent it into this festival. And the verse was a little less tight, actually, and the rhyme was a little less tight.
In that first version?
In the first version. And when they read it, all the moments where the verse was really tight and the rhyme was really exact were really singing. And all the moments where it was a little looser totally dropped. So I went back through and I trimmed everything up. Yeah.
Can we talk though about the hanging rhymes? You wrote it so it rhymed, but you knew that in performance, those rhymes would be dotted around the text because it would be I don't know how you describe it really. It would be recited as vernacular speech.
Yes.
That's the thing that's delightful for me. I don't think I'd easily be able to think in those terms. I'd be far too trammelled by the traditional lyric writing, and I know even lyrics are much broader than that. But the AABB blah blah blah, which is death to this kind of thing. Was it conscious that you were going to do that? Because you're a performer as well as a writer, aren't you? And that presumably one must inform the other in a virtuous circle back and forth.
Oftentimes I would write stuff and then read it a few times and try to find. I think that some lines, the rhythm, there's a clear rhythm that is actually running counter to the meter of the rhyme.
Now that's interesting. Go on.
Yeah, there's a few moments where the verse is intact, but actually it just reads much more. It just reads better with a different cadence, and those moments I discovered by saying it out loud to myself, and then finding like a vein and like following that. And then sometimes things would just come out, and they wouldn't be in verse, but I was really in love with them, so then I would find a way to mush them together. And I think a lot of the hanging rhymes were basically just happy accidents, where I then was rereading and I was like, oh, that rhymes. That's nice.
Exactly as you were saying earlier. In fact, you were literally saying and making rhymes as you were speaking.
Yeah.
But that's good. I mean, that's honing and polishing and crafting, isn't it? I mean, that's essentially what you're doing. How long was the gestation period, by the way? We will get into performance in just a minute. But,
I wrote it in the first draft in 3 days.
Did you? So you had the rest of the 2 years of COVID to do some polishing.
Yeah, exactly. And it has grown substantially since then. I think you would recognize the basic outline of the play, but it has come substantially further from where it was at that point. And the additions have been over the course of 2 years.
Well, it's a growing piece, and it's still organic in that sense.
And that's the hope, is that it never hits a point of staticness.
Well, and we'll occasionally forget a line or two, and then it's really alive.
Yeah. Or we'll have the lights go up.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, I can see the idea of there being an improv element to this, if necessary. But,
Well, I think the part of it is that Connor and I work very well together, and so there's a lot of trust. There's a safety net there.
Right, let's bring this on to the performance, because actually, you were describing it as a writer that you'd seen this Serrano, and it was the hearing the performances, seeing the performances on stage which sort of brought it alive. You've got to be able to translate that to your own work. It is the performance which makes something stick or not. Your success or otherwise is absolutely in the performance. So, did you know that you were going to be in it yourself? Was that always the plan? Did you know who your cast was going to be? And because you mentioned trust already.
I did not.
This is an open question, by the way. You can start chipping in.
I did not think I was going to be in the play. I was hoping that I could get one of my old professors to play Nickel. And Harrison and I had met in Brooklyn, because we were both living there at the time. we'd gone to school together, but we'd met for coffee and we had talked about, let's do a show. And then when this show got greenlit, I actually had not even thought about Harrison. And then when
no thought given.
It wasn't. I hadn't thought about anybody.
Yeah.
You hadn't reached that stage.
There hadn't been like I'm going to write this part for this person. And then I just had this moment where I suddenly realized that he was perfect for the role. I don't even know exactly when it was. And then I texted him. I was still at home at the time with COVID, and I just said, will you please do this show? You would be great for this role. And he was pretty immediately on board.
It was very much like, absolutely. Connor and I had worked together in a couple different capacities through school. We often went up for the same parts.
Yeah, we were in competition.
We were in a bit of competition for each other. And then after that, we kind of decided that it was worth leaving behind the rivalry.
Once you go out into the world and you realize that nobody cares.
Well, and the experience that we had working together was so wonderful and so mutualistic, and our friendship has really blossomed since then.
Well, that must help with the intertwining of the organic nature of the performance.
Yeah.
But forgive me, if I received an email with, it's very flattering to be asked to do a show, but then someone says, and by the way, look, here's 58 pages of tightly written text, and some of it, it all rhymes, but it's going to be hard. I mean, it must be hard. Is it, right, let me ask you a question. Is it harder to learn? Something which has a rhyming scheme, but which is also conversational, therefore the rhyming scheme takes itself out of more lyrical traditional patterns?
So for me, I grew up learning piano, I grew up singing, I did a lot of musical theater in high school, and I sang in choir.
You're our kind of man.
Yeah. So for me, it felt a lot easier. It felt a lot easier memorizing than having just a block of text in front of me that I have to carve and piece out. It felt very natural. Yeah. So it was not daunting, and it was also nice to have, each line is about 5 words, and then there's another 5 words, and so I can kind of chunk it out that way as opposed to having
very convenient for memorization.
Yeah, multi-paragraphs of thoughts.
And it's a duologue as well, isn't it? Which means actually that, not lengthy monologues, basically, and therefore not having lengthy monologues I assume is easier to learn, and there's more mutuality, to use the word you just used.
Yes.
You're bouncing off each other, but I've got to ask you this question. I've sung some duets in my time, terribly, incidentally, but the person I was learning them with said to me, he said, you cannot rely on the other person to give you the cue, you have to know them yourself, so if the other person dries, you're in.
Yeah.
And that was a really important piece of learning for me. Is that the same with it? I mean, this is acting craft, and I don't know because I'm not an actor, but is that, there is the mutuality, but also the need to be independent in performance? That's quite a difficult square to circle, isn't it?
Certainly. I think that that's also part of what lends it, the conversational element of the piece lends itself to that. That even if Connor and I were performing and one of us dropped one of the rhymes, we know where the conversation's going, and so we can pick right back up, even if we miss, and we've been pretty good about not missing. But if there was the chance of a rhyme is switched with something.
Yeah, and it's easy.
We're just talking to each other. Yeah. At the end of the day, we're just having a conversation. Yeah, the two of us.
And from the audience point of view, or certainly from my point of view, I thought it was the spontaneity of the conversation which obviously keeps the show alive. The text of a narrative is magnificent, actually, and terribly enjoyable. But it was terribly enjoyable in performance, but it wasn't a recitation, and that's the point I'm trying to make. It was an acting performance on both of your parts, through which the narrative was then able to come through and the text was able to shine. It is that perfect collegiate nature of theatre, in fact, actually, the thing that we all find so intoxicating, and in such a small, intimate experience is actually, I think it speaks so much closer to the audience. We were in the front row, we were we could see, there was a moment when you were dressing in the light, when you were putting on a nice item of clothing, and the hairs on your arms were standing up and they were backlit. Now, obviously, that's just luck of the chance of where we were sat. Wow. But actually, they were standing up, so that this sounds more like a physics lesson. But there's a sense of electricity in the air, maybe literally if your hair's standing on end, on your arm, not your head. You'll be delighted to know. Other commenters would have mentioned that, But it's all part of that intimacy, which for an audience is so intoxicating. But presumably you sense that as well. Every day is a different performance. Of course, it must be. Is it easy? Is it easier or harder? And this is once again an open question. to keep it fresh every day, knowing that there is some structure. It's a non-vernacular, or it is vernacular, but it's a vernacular script with formality and structure.
Yes.
It's harder to learn, I guess, or harder to deliver than others. It just seems to me it's a double acting skill.
I think that's true. I mean, for me, I think the one kind of, not the one, but the one of the dangers with verse, and especially rhyming verse, is that it's really easy to fall into patterns. And I find myself doing it all the time.
In your sleep?
In my sleep. And we've done the show a fair amount now, so it is especially easy at that point. But something funny happens when you've done a show maybe more than 20 times. You actually start to become fresher again.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Why is that?
I think it's an ease that you discover. I don't know if it's because there's no longer as much anxiety, so you're just a bit looser, but you suddenly will find moments, and this is starting to happen with us, where it's a completely different texture than it has ever been before, and it's really exciting, and it's really fun. And you can't always do it. I mean, if you try, you're bound to fail.
But if it comes naturally...
It just comes...
Yeah, so you're fathoming the depths in a way, that actually the hidden depths of any well-written text.
Yeah.
I also think that part of it is that I think that the content of the show is something that Connor and I, Jess, and everyone who's worked on the show resonate with quite a bit. I think for me, one of the biggest, this awe of nature, this awe of the mystery of nature, is something that I connect with so deeply, and I think that we all connect with, and that it's very easy to come in and put that on, and act through that as well, and have this awe of what's happening to these two characters.
Well, I would like to compliment you both on the air of desperation that was controlled. It was controlled desperation, and that's actually quite to have a raw emotion and then be able to calibrate it and have that calibration come across is actually, I think, very impressive. Certainly, I like that. Trying to keep each other cheerful, as it were, as far as you can, small squabbles, whatever. But the underlying fear, that desperation of your situation, without letting it overwhelm the characters. I was terribly touched by the piece in many, many ways, but that was one of them.
Thank you.
I'd like to talk about performance and bring you in, if I may. Now, when did you join the production?
Well, I actually just joined really when we got here to Edinburgh. And
we're only on the third or fourth day now, aren't we? So I'm going to suggest the word fresh is coming in.
Fresh, yeah. And what I kind of wanted to layer in there really quickly that the director that they have been working with, Andra, she was a professor of all of ours in college, and she is really, really masterful at carving a piece without making it feel stiff. That's something that I would say she is a master of.
Yeah.
So I think, in large part, that might be also due to her.
Credit where it's due, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well done.
But I first read the piece last summer. I've been friends with these two since college, him even longer actually. I got Connor to send me the piece. I like reading his work. I said, this is really great.
Epic, I believe, is the word we're offering up.
I went, wow, this is epic.
Quite right.
I just kind of kept following it, and then I've actually been living over in Ireland for the last several months, and when they said they were going to Edinburgh, I was like, great, well, if you need any help with anything, I'm definitely going to come see it. And they're like, well, do you want to come associate direct and run it? And I went, absolutely I do.
Oh, go on then.
And I actually only saw and was able to listen to it for the first time a little over a week ago. They sent me a recording. Yeah, they sent me a recording of a performance they'd done in Brooklyn. And that was really, really wonderful because, like we talked about, the auditory nature of it is huge. So I'd been just reading it out loud to myself and hearing it in my head, but yeah.
So then when you see it live, because obviously you've got that difficult role, if I may say, you're overseeing the performance from a production point of view, the lights, sound, everything, all that is yours, whilst at the same time having to keep an ear on what's going on at a sort of subliminal level to hear it ticking over, which means you can't enjoy the performance as it is, but you are getting the performance on a regular basis, subliminally, I suppose, almost. So, how are you finding hearing it daily?
I'm finding new things every day, which
Excellent.
is really fun. Yeah. So I sit back there and I have my little notebook and I literally just scribble down words. I'm like, this was great today. I loved this. This rhyme came out in a really tight way and stuff like that.
And then also notes.
And I also notes maybe we can look at this one again.
But we could not have done this without Jess.
We would be
so lost.
We realized on the first day, how screwed we would have been if we didn't have Jess here.
Well, and as we've been trying to develop our company, it's just been Connor and I for the most part.
And then Andra's director, but when Andra's not directing, we're just doing everything.
And we discovered very quickly that having someone on the outside who can kind of worry about some of the other extracurricular worries gives Connor and I the space to be as free as we need to in performance.
Yeah. I think it's
priceless.
Also having the outside eye just gives me a level of security because Jess is someone who is kind of a kindred spirit with our director Andra and is someone whose eye I trust completely and utterly. So I know that she knows whether the show is good or not, going well or not, and will be able to tell us if we're kind of moving away from that.
It's all part of the collaborative process. We come back to that again, don't we? It's once it's on the paper, then there's all the other stuff you have to do, and every extra layer makes it better.
Yeah. I also want to say sometimes we get to hear Jess chuckle at certain moments, and that's when I know it's really worked because she's seen it enough times now where she's not laughing at this stuff just to laugh.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, isn't it? In desperation is comedy.
Yes.
Very often,
yes.
This is not a Russian play. It's not it's not a angst all the way through. I mean, there's anxiety in it, but it's lots of lovely tones and feelings, and it's funny. What are the audience telling you?
We've gotten some lovely feedback on the dialect, which is a huge. It's lovely feedback to get.
Credit where it's due. I genuinely thought, Connor, you were Scottish, and I thought, Harrison, that you were a Cockney Londoner.
Thank you.
And speaking as a Londoner, I feel terribly embarrassed.
No, that's just amazing.
Outrageous.
But I think that part of we have put so much love and effort and attention into the show itself, and when we arrived, we were a bit, we might have realized and a little overwhelmed that we had put maybe not as much attention into the marketing of the show as we might have needed. But we trust that once the people come into the door and we're able to tell our story to them, that's all the marketing that we need. So,
and word of mouth is the way to do Edinburgh. You can advertise till you're blue in the face, and you can be a top-ranked comedian for spending money on the big colour posters. But actually, the posters isn't what bring people in.
Yeah. Too many posters out there.
There are, exactly. It's a kaleidoscope of Technicolor, but it's not necessarily going to give you the detail.
Exactly.
They actually don't technically have our posters yet, even.
We have a funny little anti-poster that we can show you.
I think we have a copy of it. Your lovely little skull and crossbones QR code with there's a beautiful honesty about your performance. There is a beautiful honesty in the performance, but there's beautiful honesty about your advertising. About other publicity materials are pending. I think
we went back and forth on the Fringe website about how open do we be with the do we pretend that this was this massive success in Brooklyn?
I said to my good friend Colin that I really liked what you did with what you said online. You said here are some reviews. Some people were kind enough to say this, and it was that honesty and that sense of fun, actually, which drew me in from the paper, from the advertising of the blurb, the online blurb. Sorry, if you're looking for that feedback. Your approach has been fabulous, I think.
Oh, well, that is amazing.
It's drawn people like me in, anyway. Whether that's the ideal demographic, I wouldn't like to say.
Apparently, yes. Yeah.
Well, and I just would like to say, in terms of the audience feedback that we've been getting, you guys are often off the stage, and then they are leaving. And it has been wonderful so far. A lot of people walking out going, it was not knowing what they were getting themselves into. We've been, flyering a lot, getting people off the streets, but it has been overwhelmingly positive feedback, which is really exciting to hear.
And we like keeping an air of mystery about it as well. That is quite fun.
We tell people that we find a chest, but they have to come see the show to find out what's inside.
Well, actually, the narrative arc is beautifully serpentine. There are a set of tropes that this could have been, and actually it's managed to avoid, or rather it's picked up the flavours of where it needs to pick up the flavours, but actually then it goes off in lots of lovely different directions, you never stand still, and I think that's rather lovely. And there are some bits I'd love to talk about, which obviously I don't want to for spoiler purposes, but the audience came alive at one or two points, particularly in terms of the humour, and let us merely say that your prop work and your interrelationship with props is I think to be commended, and suggests of a wealth of experience in your wider life. So
We hope that people are coming and that they leave a bit enlightened and maybe open to alternative
maybe a bit
perspectives.
confused.
A bit confused.
Let's just say eyes are open and very possibly other orifices.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say, like, mentioning the serpentine nature.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wondered when I was writing it, a lot of the unexpected directions the show goes in were not like things that I figured out at some point was going to happen. Honestly, I think 90% of the time it was a good rhyme, and then I was like, "Oh,
now I have this."
Yes, exactly. And for me, that was really exciting, and also somewhat unreplicatable, unfortunately. But
you say that. I mean, I think you've touched on something which is very important about creativity, and obviously, I mean, everyone here is infinitely more creative than I am. But I think creativity is very often an act of discovery, and that's the word I like. You know, there are people who think, I shall plot what this shall be from the beginning, and that is a way of doing it, but that can be stilted. It can allow you to fall into traps. To discover is an organic process again, and that, it seems to me, will take you down these paths which make this fresh and original. And it's not the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and it's not this, and it's not that. It is what it is. It's the Queen Thomasina, and it is nothing else, and that is fabulous. You know, that is the outcome. You know, I don't know if that... Obviously, you wanted to write something that was fabulous. Who wouldn't? But I think you've succeeded. Sorry, you were about to say.
Well, I was going to say, I think that, you know, if there was something that, like, really stood out to me about the script when Connor originally sent it to me, is that he had written in this slow release of information. It was a very, like, the audience wakes up and knows just about as much as the characters do. And that we take them on the journey of, we have this chest. What is the chest? And we look at it from every angle, and then suddenly we release that information, and that opens up. So I think that that's Connor's very finely tuned writing to allow that slow release of information.
Timing and pace is very important.
Yes.
I've always been really attracted to plays that have at least one mystery that the audience is waiting to be solved. I think like 3 plays I wrote before this, and I don't think finished any of them, had boxes in them that didn't get open until the...
So tell me, Mr. Freud, what do you think this means?
Yeah. I could think of a lot of explanations. But I think I went... on the opposite side of that, the mistake could be that you rely only on this mystery to keep the audience engaged, and that was something I realized when I was first writing it. I'm being over-reliant on this chest. There has to be other things going on, other dynamics than just like, oh, what's inside the chest.
And a human story.
Exactly.
You know, it has to have humanity and be humane, which it succeeds in.
Yeah.
And that is the art of good drama, is it not? It's the art of true drama, perhaps.
Yeah.
Goodness, that sounded important, didn't it? I don't know how I landed there.
We'll punctuate that with silence.
Yeah.
I am so proud of these two and the work that they've done.
Well,
that we've all done.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of all of us, and I'm very pleased to be here.
I will say, just really quickly about like the serpentine aspect of it. I think the first time I saw this show live, which was the first performance here at Fringe,
yes,
I was really taken aback by, you mentioned earlier, the humor and the desperation. By the fact that Connor has managed to write in these shifts from desperate to funny that could so easily be jarring as an audience member.
it's not a handbrake turn, is it?
But instead, I went, like, he's written and they've performed it in a way that it takes me right along with it, and it doesn't feel jarring, and it feels right and human in the moment. Like, particularly towards the end, I won't spoil anything, but there's like some really lovely moments of humor that when I read it on the page, I went, I don't know how is that going to work? And watching these two do it and hearing them do it is really, really lovely. So I'll end on that.
And we also, I mean, we need to give credit to Andra, our director, for that, who helped us find the way to align these moments together.
Connor and I, through a lot of the creative process, felt a bit like, at least I did, felt like raw steel. And Andra is the most meticulous of blacksmiths and turned us into this finely tuned instrument.
Cutlass.
Yeah, we'd be a little bit more rough around the edges with that, I think, possibly.
Well, I can only say I thought the show was magnificent. Colin and I, we both very much enjoyed it. I should just check. Is there anything you want to say about it or not?
I don't think so. I wanted to ask, the song at the end, are they your own lyrics?
They are, yeah.
Because there was also that nice shift from the kind of vernacular verse into something that was even more constrained. But at the same time, it felt like for want of a better phrase, a real song that had existed for 200 years.
Well, thank you very much. And we also have to give credit to the composer of the song. His name is J.T. Kaufman, and who did the brilliant thing of writing something that I like more I hear it. Like, I liked it to begin with, and now I love it, and it won't get out of my head. So maybe that's a bad thing.
And it's a joy to sing. It feels good just to say the words in that. It feels like the perfect ending to the show.
And Colin, you've actually pointed something out to me which I don't think I'd realised there, but there is also that the narrowing of opportunity, the narrowing of worlds. On sea you'd have had the world at your hand, as characters. Pirates own the world in some sense. It's certainly the sea. Then you're on an island, which is a limited landmass, and it's described. The size of the island is described and what's on it, and then you're getting down to the prop with the chest. There's not much else, and then you're down to each other. But in the narrative terms, you've also got the the vernacular, and the rhyme is a form of structure. And you just pointed out there, Colin, that actually to go into a song is a tighter form of structure. It's a narrower form of structure. So the world is funneling in towards the climax, which I structurally that's also terribly interesting.
I wish I could say it was intentional.
Well, say it is, and we'll just you simply can.
100% intentional.
Yeah, there we are. Oh, I love it. Brilliant. I think here in the United Kingdom we've had a series of monarchs recently, but the Queen Thomasina is a very welcome addition to the pantheon. And I can merely say thank you so much for bringing it to Edinburgh. Thank you so much for talking about it so eloquently and so interestingly. It was a great show, a fabulous show, and I can merely end by saying Vivat Regina.
Thank you so much. It was a complete pleasure to be here, and honestly, it feels amazing to be interviewed about the show, and especially so intricately and
by somebody who's so well spoken.
Yeah.
Truly though.
No, that's very kind. In fairness, I am a mere parasite. You are the people you are the creators, and you are the people who have done all the work. So the credit is entirely yours. So thank you
so much. Thank you.
Musical talk. And there we are. That was the marvellous Jessica Graham, Harrison Lind and Connor Johnson. 3 wonderful people behind a wonderful show, The Wreck of the Queen Thomasina, which danced around the edges of being musical theatre, but for the purposes of musical talk absolutely was. And it was a joy and a delight. And I do hope that the Edinburgh run is not the last time that we or anyone will have a chance of seeing this fabulous show. I'm also keen to see what more Connor and Harrison and Jessica might have for us in the future. And it's also worth mentioning that they were lovely, lovely people. You probably got that from the interview, but I can tell you that I kept bumping into them throughout my stay in Edinburgh last summer. It became quite a thing. We just kept walking into each other in streets, in buildings, by lifts, you name it, we found each other. And every time we did, we stopped and we had a wonderful chat because they were so friendly and such lovely people. And just to finish this story, and indeed this set of personal references, I was buying a ticket to see the show a second time. It was one of only 2 shows in Edinburgh last year that I saw twice because I enjoyed it so very much. And when I was talking to the 2 people behind the counter at the ticket office where I was buying my second ticket, they said, "Oh, the people behind that show are the loveliest people in Edinburgh." So here are 3 wonderful people who've made a real splash in the Scottish capital and at the Fringe. And I know that I speak for a lot of people when I say that I hope that we'll see them again. And I hope that you'll feel the same way about wanting to be in my company again in the next few weeks here on Musical Talk. And if so, that means I can finish this episode safe in the knowledge that you're likely to tune in again and that I haven't repulsed you for all time from ever listening to a further episode of Musical Talk. So do join us again next week or whenever, when we'll be talking about something completely different. Musical talk is as broad and as deep as the world of musical theatre, and as we've discovered today, that's pretty broad and it's pretty deep. But it's not as deep as the deep blue sea where the wreck of the Queen Thomasina lies. Vivat Regina. And with that spot of random Latin, let's finish with good old English. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, episode 838, was presented by Thos and Colin Malloy and edited by Thos. Copyright Musical Talk 2024. To find out more about the world of musical talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on the usual social media networks like Facebook, Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. And if you want to follow me on the latter, you can. At Musical Talk Thos. A lot of us to is human, as I'm sure you know.
I can't take credit for it. I saw it on posters.
No, but you're in character. I like it. But it very much is a case of, if you stop to think and answer, I will take out that thinking time, and you will look like a genius, which is what everyone wants, frankly. Is that right? Now, Musical Talk is a musical theatre podcast normally, so we're going slightly on our edges here, but it is actually, firstly, because we only talk about shows we enjoy. Unless you're in the West End or Broadway, in which case we feel that the big names can take a bit of criticism. So we like this. But more importantly, if you don't mind me saying, the reason I'm very happy to be talking to you, and we were talking about this, weren't we? We were talking about the fact it's a ballad essentially. There's that interesting rhyming lyrical scan inside it. So. I can't call it a musical, but I would like to talk about. I'm going to focus on this as, if you like, as one enormous lyric. Yeah. If I can take that element from it, and that will give us enough book to make this legit, from our point of view. Sure. All happy. Oh, look at that breathing out. That's very good. Yes, quite. That's an actor, isn't it? Now I'm still recording. So I just want to make sure you're... Oh, totally, but I just want to make sure, are you happy with that? Anything you want in or out before we get to the end of it?
That felt great to me.
Lovely. That was just beautiful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Yeah, was that all right?
Guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really nice.